Life has a cruel way of showing us our worth when we least expect it. Sir Aldric had given everything to his kingdom, yet stood forgotten among the lesser knights while younger men claimed glory. When rewards were handed out after their recent victory, the stablemaster brought forth the horses. Gleaming destriers went to the noble lords. For Aldric, there was only Bramble, a limping, scarred stallion the court deemed worthless. Laughter echoed through the hall. "A broken knight gets a broken horse," they mocked. But Aldric knelt beside the wounded animal and saw something familiar in those tired eyes. While others celebrated, he led Bramble away, speaking softly to calm the horse's trembling. Neither understood that their bond would soon save the entire kingdom. How could two forgotten souls become the realm's greatest hope? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Ravenholm Castle like memories that refused to fade. Sir Aldric of Thornwick walked the familiar path to the stables, his warm boots echoing softly against the ancient stones. At 53, he moved with the careful precision of a man who had learned to navigate life's disappointments with quiet dignity. His father's sword hung at his side, not the ornate blade of noble birth, but honest steel forged by village hands. The leather grip, darkened by decades of use, bore the imprint of 2 generations of Thornwick men who had served their kingdom without fanfare or recognition. Aldric's calloused fingers traced the pommel, a habit born from years of seeking comfort in the familiar. The castle stirred around him as servants began their daily routines. In the distance, he could hear the younger knights training in the courtyard, their laughter carrying on the crisp autumn air. Sir Garrett of Millhaven's voice rose above the others, boasting about his new destrier, a Taustier, a Tane, magnificent bay stallion gifted by the king for his valor in the recent campaign against border raiders. Aldric remembered when such rewards had seemed possible for him. 30 years ago, he had arrived at court as a blacksmith's son with calloused hands and dreams larger than his station. Through determination and an uncommon skill with blade and horse, he had earned his spurs through deed, rather than birthright. Those early years had been filled with hope, each small victory building toward what he believed would be a distinguished career in service to the crown. But noble blood ran thicker than merit in the halls of power. As the years passed, Aldric watched lesser men rise to positions he coveted, their family names opening doors that remained close to him. The young lords who arrived at court with their polished armor and practiced courtesies found favor with King Edmund. While Aldric's steady service became as invisible as morning mist, his quarters reflected his position, a modest chamber in the castle's older wing furnished with simple necessities. No tapestries adorned his walls, no silver graced his table. Instead, he kept his father's tools on a wooden shelf, the hammer that had shaped his first sword, the file that had taught him precision, the small anvil that had witnessed countless hours of patient work. These relics of his past reminded him daily of the journey from forge to knighthood, a path that had brought him honor but little else. The stable master, Willem, greeted him with the respectful nod of one working man to another. At 68, Willem had served the castle longer than anyone, his weathered face a map of decades spent caring for the kingdom's horses. His daughter Elena often helped with the animals, her gentle touch and keen eye for their needs making her invaluable despite her humble birth. "The new horse is settling poorly," Willem said, gesturing toward the far stall where Bramble stood, with his head hanging low. "Been 3 days since the ceremony, and he won't eat proper. Keeps favoring that left front leg something fierce." Aldric approached the stall slowly, taking in the stallion's condition with practiced eyes. Bramble was a magnificent animal despite his injuries, a deep chestnut with intelligent eyes and the powerful build of a destrier bred for war. Scars marked his flanks and legs, telling stories of battles survived and courage tested. His coat, though dulled by poor care, held the promise of former glory. "What do you know of his history?" Aldric asked, extending his hand palm up toward the horse's muzzle. Willem shook his head sadly. "Came from the borderlands after the fighting. His rider didn't make it home. Been passed between handlers ever since, each one giving up when he wouldn't respond. The stable master at Westmark called him cursed, said he'd never be fit for service again." The horse's nostrils flared as he caught Aldric's scent, ears pricking forward with cautious interest. There was wariness in those dark eyes, but also a glimmer of something else, a spark that reminded Aldric of his own younger self, battered but not broken. "He's not cursed," Aldric said quietly, his voice carrying the certainty of experience. "He's grieving." Elena appeared at his shoulder, carrying a bucket of fresh water and clean rags. At 28, she possessed her father's gift with animals and a wisdom that belied her years. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her simple woolen dress spoke of honest work rather than courtly pretension. "You see it, too," she said, watching as Bramble tentatively stretched his neck toward Aldric's outstretched hand. "The way he stands, the sadness in his posture. He's lost someone important." Aldric nodded, feeling the horse's warm breath against his palm. "Animals mourn differently than we do, but they mourn just the same. This one has a warrior's heart. He just needs to remember how to trust again." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their quiet communion. Sir Garrett rode into the stable yard astride his new destrier, followed by a handful of younger knights eager to bask in his reflected glory. At 32, Garrett embodied everything the court valued: noble birth, martial prowess, and the easy confidence that came from never knowing want or disappointment. "Still nursing your broken horse, old man?" Garrett called out, dismounting with theatrical flourish. "The king expects his knights to ride proper mounts, not charity cases from the battlefield." The younger knights laughed dutifully, their mirth echoing off the stable walls like the braying of well-dressed donkeys. Aldric felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the sting of casual cruelty delivered with a smile. "Every horse deserves care," he replied evenly, refusing to rise to the bait. "This one has served the kingdom faithfully. His injuries don't diminish his worth." "Spoken like a man who understands broken things," Sir Marcus said, the king's youngest son stepping forward with the calculated cruelty of youth. At 25, Prince Marcus had inherited his father's sharp features, but none of his wisdom. "Perhaps you should have been given a mirror instead of a horse. It would have been more appropriate." The laughter grew louder, and Aldric felt heat rise in his cheeks. But before he could respond, Bramble stepped forward in his stall, ears pinned back and teeth bared toward the mocking knights. The horse's protective stance spoke volumes, even in his wounded state. He recognized a kindred spirit in the older knight. Elena moved closer to Aldric, her presence offering quiet support. "Ignore them," she whispered. "Their words say more about them than about you." Prince Marcus noticed the exchange, and his eyes narrowed with malicious interest. "Careful, Sir Aldric. Wouldn't want the servants getting ideas above their station." The insult hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Aldric's hand tightened on his sword hilt, 30 years of accumulated slights threatening to boil over. But then he felt Bramble's gentle nudge against his shoulder, the horse's simple gesture grounding him in the present moment. "My station is to serve the kingdom," Aldric said quietly. "Some of us remember that duty extends beyond our own glory." The young knights fell silent, recognizing the subtle rebuke in his words. Prince Marcus's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, Willem stepped forward with the authority of age and experience. "Begging your pardon, my lords, but the horses need their rest. Perhaps you might continue your conversation elsewhere?" Garrett mounted his destrier with exaggerated grace, gathering his followers like a shepherd collecting sheep. "Come," he said to the others. "We have real training to do, not coddling wounded animals." As they rode away, their laughter fading into the distance, Aldric felt the weight of his years settle heavily upon his shoulders. Each day brought fresh reminders of his diminished place in the world. Each slight another brick in the wall that separated him from the life he had once envisioned. But Bramble remained at his side, and in the horse's steady presence, Aldric found an unexpected source of strength. They were both casualties of a world that valued appearance over substance, breeding over character. Yet they endured, and in their shared resilience lay the seeds of something greater than either could achieve alone. The afternoon sun slanted through the stable windows, casting long shadows across the straw-covered floor. Aldric began the slow work of earning Bramble's trust, his patient movements speaking a language older than words, the timeless communication between man and horse that transcended the petty divisions of rank and station. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, fresh humiliations, and the endless struggle to maintain dignity in a world that seemed determined to strip it away. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of the stables, two wounded souls began the delicate work of healing each other. The raven arrived at dawn, its black wings cutting through the gray morning sky like an omen of ill fortune. Sir Aldric watched from the stable yard as the bird settled on the castle's highest tower, its harsh cry echoing across the courtyard. Within minutes, bells began to ring, not the measured tolls of daily routine, but the urgent clanging that summoned all to attention. In the bird's leather pouch lay a message that would change everything, though Aldric could not yet know it. The parchment bore the seal of Lord Commander Theron, guardian of the northern marshes, and its contents would soon send ripples of fear through every corner of the kingdom. "The Nordmark have returned," the message read in Theron's cramped handwriting. "Larger force than before. Estimate 3,000 warriors, well-armed and organized. They move south with purpose, burning villages as they advance. Request immediate reinforcement. Time grows short." King Edmund received the news in his great hall, surrounded by advisors whose faces paled as the letter's contents were read aloud. The Nordmark raiders had been a persistent thorn in the kingdom's side for generations. Savage warriors from the frozen wastes who descended like wolves whenever they sensed weakness. But this sounded different, more organized and threatening than their usual raids. Aldric learned of the crisis secondhand, as befitted his station. Willem brought word from his cousin, who served in the castle kitchens, and soon the entire stable was buzzing with worried conversation. The Nordmark were notorious for their cruelty, taking slaves and burning settlements that offered resistance. More troubling still were reports of their improved weapons and tactics, suggesting they might have found new allies or leadership. "My lord father fought them 20 years past," Elena said quietly as she helped Aldric brush Bramble's coat. "He said they were like no enemy he'd ever faced, fearless to the point of madness, caring nothing for their own lives so long as they could spill blood." The horse stood calmly under their ministrations, his trust in Aldric growing stronger. Each day, the limp had improved considerably, and his appetite had returned along with some of the fire in his eyes. Yet Bramble remained gentle with those who showed him kindness, as if understanding the rare gift of compassion in a world often cruel. By midday, the war council had convened in the king's private chambers. Aldric could see the comings and goings, from the stable yard lords and military commanders arriving with grave expressions, their discussions stretching long into the afternoon. When they finally emerged, their faces told the story before any official announcement could be made. Sir Garrett was among the first to spread the news, his voice carrying across the training grounds with characteristic arrogance. "The northern lords have called for aid," he announced to his gathered companions. Finally, a chance for real glory instead of policing farmers' disputes. The younger knights received this news with excitement rather than dread, their inexperience showing in their eagerness for battle. They spoke of honor and heroic deeds, seeing war as an opportunity to prove their worth rather than understanding its grim realities. 3,000 Nordmark warriors, Sir Marcus added, his eyes bright with anticipation. Father says they've been raiding along the border for months, growing bolder each time. Now they march on the fortress towns. Aldric listened to their boasts with growing unease. He had fought the Nordmark before in the border skirmishes of his younger days, and knew them to be formidable opponents. They were not the undisciplined barbarians these young men imagined, but seasoned warriors hardened by generations of warfare in the harsh northern lands. The official summons came that evening, delivered by a royal page who could barely look Aldric in the eye. All knights of the realm were commanded to assemble at dawn for the march north, bringing their best weapons and mounts. The irony was not lost on Aldric. After years of being overlooked for important assignments, he was now needed because the kingdom faced its gravest threat in decades. He spent the evening preparing his equipment with methodical care. His armor was functional rather than ornate, showing the wear of countless battles, but maintained in perfect condition. His father's sword had been recently sharpened, its edge gleaming in the lamplight. Most importantly, he tended to Bramble with extra attention, knowing that their partnership would soon face its ultimate test. "You don't have to do this," Elena said softly as she watched him work. "Your service has been long and faithful. No one would question your honor if you claimed injury or illness." Aldric paused in his preparations, considering her words. The offer was tempting. He could remain safe at court while younger men rode to war. But something in Bramble's steady gaze reminded him of duties that transcended personal comfort. "This is what we trained for," he replied, running his hand along the horse's neck. "All those years of being overlooked, of being considered past our prime, perhaps this is why we were preserved." From this moment, when experience matters more than youth, the War Council reconvened at midnight, and this time Aldric was not excluded. The great hall buzzed with urgent conversation as maps were unfurled and strategies debated. Lord Commander Theron's messenger had arrived with additional intelligence that painted an even grimmer picture. They moved with unprecedented coordination. The messenger reported, his face grim with exhaustion from hard riding. Multiple columns advancing simultaneously, striking at different targets to prevent unified resistance. Their leaders wear strange armor and carry weapons of foreign make. King Edmund studied the maps with growing concern. The Nordmark advance threatened not just the northern settlements, but the kingdom's entire defensive strategy. If they broke through the border fortresses, the way would be open to the heart of the realm. "How long before they reach Ironhold?" the king asked, referencing the great fortress that anchored the northern defenses. 4 days, perhaps 5 if Lord Commander Theron can slow their advance, came the reply, but his forces are vastly outnumbered. Without reinforcement, the fortress will fall. The gravity of the situation settled over the assembled knights like a shroud. This was no glorious campaign against scattered raiders, but a desperate race to prevent catastrophe. Yet even now, Aldric noticed the subtle ways he was excluded from the inner circle of planning. The younger knights clustered around Prince Marcus, their discussions animated despite the dire circumstances. "The royal cavalry will form the spearhead," Sir Garrett announced, his voice carrying the confidence of unearned authority. "We'll strike at their main force while the foot soldiers secure the flanks." Aldric held his tongue, though years of experience screamed warnings about such simplistic tactics. The Nordmark were not fools. They would expect a cavalry charge and have prepared accordingly. But who would listen to the counsel of a forgotten knight on a broken horse? As the meeting dispersed, Aldric caught fragments of conversation that troubled him deeply. The young knights spoke of easy victory and swift return, their plans built on assumptions rather than intelligence. Worse still, Prince Marcus seemed to view the campaign as an opportunity to enhance his own reputation rather then a duty to protect the realm. The pre-dawn hours passed in a blur of final preparations. The castle courtyard filled with the controlled chaos of an army preparing to march, horses being saddled, weapons checked, provisions loaded onto supply wagons. The air thrummed with nervous energy as men faced the prospect of battle. Bramble stood quietly in his stall, seemingly unaffected by the commotion around him. His wounds had healed remarkably under Aldric's care, and the once-broken Stallion now carried himself with quiet dignity. There was strength in his bearing, a sense of readiness that spoke to depths the court had never bothered to explore. "He knows," Elena observed, watching the horse's calm preparation. "Animals sense these things before we do. He understands what's coming." Aldric nodded, checking his mount's tack one final time. Everything was in order, from the placement of his sword to the security of his armor. 3 decades of military service had taught him the importance of such details in battle. The smallest oversight could mean the difference between life and death. The trumpet sounded as the first rays of sunlight painted the eastern sky. Knights mounted their destriers in order of precedence, with Prince Marcus taking his place at the head of the column. Sir Garrett and the other young nobles formed the front ranks, their polished armor gleaming in the morning light. Aldric found his assigned position near the rear. Among the older knights and those of lesser station, it was a familiar place, one he had occupied for years during ceremonial functions and royal processions. But today felt different today. Their true worth would be measured not by bloodlines or court favor, but by their courage in the face of mortal danger. As they rode through the castle gates, Aldric felt Bramble's powerful stride beneath him and allowed himself a moment of pride. Whatever the court might think of them, they were ready for the trials ahead. The broken knight and his wounded horse had found each other in their darkest hour, and together they would face whatever the gods had in store. The healing salve gleamed amber in the lamplight, its surface reflecting the gentle flame like liquid gold. Aldric had mixed it himself from herbs gathered in the castle's medicinal garden comfrey for the deep bruises, willow bark for pain, and chamomile to soothe the spirit as much as the flesh. The recipe was his grandmother's, passed down through generations of common folk who understood that healing required patience as much as knowledge. 3 weeks had passed since that humiliating day in the great hall, and the gradual transformation taking place in the stables spoke to the power of gentle persistence. Each morning brought small victories, a willing step forward, a moment of trust, a flicker of the proud spirit that had once made Bramble a warrior's mount. "Easy now," Aldric murmured, his voice soft as velvet as he worked the salve into the horse's scarred shoulder. Bramble stood motionless, no longer flinching at human touch. The worst of the swelling had subsided, and new muscle was beginning to fill out the hollows where poor care had taken its toll. The process reminded Aldric of his own recovery from the Battle of Greystone Ford. 15 years past. He had taken a lance through the shoulder, the wound festering for weeks before the castle's physician finally declared it beyond healing. But Elena's predecessor, an old woman named Marta, who understood the wisdom of plants, had tended him with remedies the court physician scorned. Like Bramble, he had learned that healing came not from grand gestures, but from countless small acts of care. "My father says you're wasting your time," Elena observed, entering the stall with fresh straw under her arm. Her presence had become a welcome constant in these quiet sessions, her natural understanding of wounded things making her an invaluable ally. "Your father is a wise man," Aldric replied, never pausing in his gentle ministrations. "But wisdom sometimes means knowing when conventional thinking fails us." Elena spread the straw with practiced efficiency, her movements creating a comfortable rustling that Bramble had learned to associate with safety. "He also says you see something in this horse that others have missed." Aldric paused, considering his words carefully. "I see what I once was full of potential that others couldn't recognize." wounded by circumstances beyond my control, forgotten by those who should have known better. The comparison was not lost on Elena, who had watched Aldric endure years of subtle cruelties with quiet dignity. She had seen him train alone in the early hours before dawn, maintaining skills that the court no longer valued. She had witnessed his careful attention to duty, even as younger men received the recognition he deserved. "Tell me about your father," she said, settling onto a wooden stool beside the stall. These conversations had become ritual, the sharing of stories, helping to pass the long hours of rehabilitation. Aldric's weathered face softened at the memory. Thomas Thornwick was the finest blacksmith in 3 counties. Not the richest or most famous, but the finest. He understood that strength came from the slow forging, the patient tempering. "Good steel takes time," he used to say. "Rush the process, and you get pretty metal that breaks when tested." Bramble turned his great head toward Aldric's voice, ears pricked forward with interest. The horse had begun to respond to these storytelling sessions, as if understanding that words could carry comfort as surely as gentle hands. "He made this sword," Aldric continued, his fingers tracing the pommel of the blade at his side. "Spent 3 months on it, working in the evenings after his regular commissions were done. Said it needed to be perfect because it would outlive us both." The sword was indeed a masterpiece, though its simple design would never catch a courtier's eye. The steel held a subtle pattern like flowing water, the result of countless folds and forgings. The crossguard bore no gems or elaborate engravings, only the functional beauty of perfect proportion. "He taught me that true worth isn't always visible on the surface," Aldric said, beginning to massage Bramble's injured leg with careful precision. "Sometimes the most valuable things are overlooked because they don't shine bright enough for shallow eyes." A commotion in the courtyard interrupted their peaceful session. Through the stable doors, they could see Sir Garrett leading his usual entourage in mounted drills, their horses dancing and prancing under the autumn sun. The young knights rode with flashy technique, all speed and flourish but little substance. "Show-offs," Elena muttered, watching them perform elaborate maneuvers that would serve no purpose in actual combat. Aldric said nothing, but his expression grew thoughtful as he observed their training. These were brave young men, he knew, but their bravery was untested and their skills untested. They had learned the forms of knighthood without understanding its essence, mistaking pageantry for preparation. "Sir Aldric." Willem's voice carried urgency as the stable-master hurried toward them. "You're wanted in the hall. Something about the northern situation." The northern situation, a polite euphemism for the growing threat that hung over the kingdom, like storm clouds on the horizon. Reports from the borderlands grew more troubling each week, speaking of increased raiding and strange new tactics among the Nordmark tribes. Aldric gave Bramble a final pat, the horse whickering softly at his departure. The sound carried a note of regret, as if the animal understood that their peaceful interludes were precious and limited. The great hall buzzed with subdued conversation when Aldric arrived, taking his customary place among the lesser knights. King Edmund sat upon his throne, his usually jovial expression replaced by lines of worry. Beside him stood Prince Marcus, resplendent in new armor that had never seen battle. "My lords," the king began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber, "we have received disturbing news from our scouts along the northern marshes. The raiders grow bolder, striking deeper into our territory with each passing week." A murmur ran through the assembled knights, excitement mixing with apprehension. For the younger men, this promised the adventure they craved. For veterans like Aldric, it meant the return of old nightmares. "Lord Commander Theron requests additional cavalry support," the king continued. "I am therefore ordering a reconnaissance in force to assess the threat and provide aid where needed." Sir Garrett stepped forward eagerly. "Your Majesty, my company stands ready," We can ride within the hour." "Your enthusiasm is commendable," King Edmund replied. "But this mission requires experience as well as courage. Sir Aldric, you fought the Nordmark in the border campaigns. Your counsel would be valuable." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of surprise throughout the hall. Aldric felt every eye upon him, measuring his reaction to this unexpected recognition. Some faces showed curiosity, others skepticism, and a few particularly among the younger knights displayed barely concealed resentment. "I am at your service, your majesty," Aldric replied simply, his voice steady despite the rapid beating of his heart. Prince Marcus's expression darkened at this development. "Father, surely Sir Garrett is better suited to lead such an important mission. His men are trained and ready, while Sir Aldric ... He let the sentence hang, its implication clear. "While Sir Aldric has actually fought these enemies," the king finished sharply. "Experience matters, my son. Glory is won by those who survive to claim it." The rebuke stung Prince Marcus visibly, his face flushing with embarrassment and anger. Around him, the younger knights exchanged glances that spoke of wounded pride and simmering resentment. "The reconnaissance will depart at first light, King," Edmund continued. 20 knights, provisioned for a fortnight's patrol. Sir Aldric will provide guidance based on his knowledge of Nordmark tactics. As the assembly dispersed, Aldric found himself surrounded by a mixture of congratulations and subtle hostility. The older knights welcomed his inclusion with genuine pleasure, while the younger ones maintained polite facades that barely concealed their displeasure. "Quite an honor," Sir Garrett said as they walked toward the stables, his tone carefully neutral. "I hope your mount proves equal to the task." The barb hit its mark, drawing uncomfortable laughter from his companions. Bramble's reputation as a broken-down charity case had become a running joke among the court's elite. "We'll manage," Aldric replied evenly, refusing to rise to the provocation. Back in the stables, Elena was waiting with Bramble ready for evening exercise. The horse's condition had improved remarkably. His coat now gleamed with health. His bearing spoke of renewed strength, and his eyes held the alert intelligence of a warrior restored. "I heard about the mission," Elena said quietly. "Are you ready for this?" Aldric studied his mount with critical eyes. Bramble was stronger than he had been in months, but was he strong enough for what lay ahead? The northern marsh were harsh country, demanding stamina and sure-footedness from both horse and rider. "We'll find out," he said, swinging into the saddle with practiced ease. Bramble moved out at his touch, no longer the broken animal of 3 weeks past, but something approaching his former glory. As they rode through the castle gates for their evening exercise, Aldric felt a stirring of something he had not experienced. In years' anticipation mixed with genuine hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and the days ahead promised danger beyond imagining. But for the first time and longer than he cared to remember, he would face those challenges as something more than a forgotten relic of past glories. The broken knight and his wounded horse had found each other at their lowest ebb, and through patience and mutual care, they had begun to heal. Soon, the world would discover what 2 forgotten souls could accomplish when they refused to accept defeat. The training rope lay coiled in Aldric's weathered hands like a serpent of hope. Made from the finest hemp and blessed by patient craftsmanship, it represented something far more precious than its simple appearance suggested. This rope had become the bridge between 2 wounded souls, a tangible symbol of trust slowly rebuilt from ashes of despair. Dawn broke gray and cold over the castle training grounds, painting the world in shades of silver and mist. Most of the court still slumbered, but Aldric had risen before the bell tower's first chime, as was his custom. These early hours belonged to him and Bramble alone, free from the mocking eyes and cruel tongues that made their daylight exercises an ordeal. "Easy, boy," Aldric murmured, his voice carrying the gentle authority of experience. Bramble stood at the rope's center, no longer the trembling, broken creature of a month past. His coat gleamed with health, muscles rippling beneath the surface, like water over stone. More importantly, his eyes held the calm alertness of a warrior who had remembered his worth. The ropework was Alana's suggestion, borrowed from her observations of the castle's horse trainers, but adapted for their unique circumstances. Instead of harsh commands and sharp corrections, they used gentle guidance and patient repetition, each session built upon the last, creating layers of trust that ran deeper than mere obedience. Elena approached from the stable, carrying a bucket of oats and wearing the quiet smile that had become as essential to their morning ritual as the sunrise itself. At 28, she possessed the kind of beauty that grew more evident with familiarity, not the flashy allure that caught a young man's eye, but the steady radiance that spoke of character and wisdom. "He's moving better today," she observed, watching as Bramble responded to Aldric's subtle guidance. The horse's gait had improved dramatically, the limp that once defined him now barely perceptible. "The body heals faster than the spirit," Aldric replied, adjusting the rope's tension with practiced hands. "But both are mending." Their partnership had evolved into something that transcended the traditional boundaries between knight and stable. Girl. Elena's insights into animal behavior complemented Aldric's military experience, creating a training regimen that addressed both physical and emotional wounds. More importantly, her presence provided something Aldric had not realized he needed: acceptance without judgment, companionship without expectation. "My father worries about you," Elena said, offering Bramble a handful of oats. The horse accepted the treat with gentle lips, his manner with her as courteous as any lord's. "Willem is a wise man to worry," Aldric acknowledged. "The northern mission grows closer each day, and our enemies are not known for their mercy." The Nordmark threat loomed over everything now, coloring even their peaceful morning sessions with urgency. Reports from the borderlands grew more troubling with each passing week: villages burned, settlements abandoned, and the systematic destruction that spoke of conquest rather than mere raiding. "Tell me about them," Elena requested, settling onto her familiar stool beside the training area. These conversations had become as much a part of their routine as the physical exercises, the sharing of knowledge and experience creating bonds that ran deeper than mere friendship. Aldric continued, working with Bramble as he spoke, his movements automatic after weeks of practice. "The Nordmark are not the savages our young knights imagine. They're disciplined warriors who've spent generations perfecting the art of war. Their culture values courage above all else, but it's not the reckless bravery of youth, it's the cold courage of men who've accepted death as the price of honor." Bramble responded to a subtle shift in the rope's position, stepping sideways with fluid grace. The movement would have been impossible a month ago. The patient rehabilitation had restored not just his physical abilities, but his confidence in them. "They fight on foot as well as horseback," Aldric continued, "and their weapons are crafted for killing rather than show. No golden hilts or jeweled pommels, just honest steel in the hands of men who know how to use it." Elena listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that knowledge might one day mean survival. Though she would not ride to war, the conflict would touch everyone in the kingdom if the northern defenses failed. "You sound almost admiring," she observed. "I respect worthy opponents," Aldric replied. "Underestimating an enemy is the surest path to defeat. The Nordmark have earned their fearsome reputation through centuries of warfare. To face them with anything less than total preparation would be folly." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their session. Sir Garrett rode into view with his usual entourage, their mounts prancing and snorting in the morning air. The young knights wore their finest training armor, polished to mirror brightness and adorned with family crests that spoke of wealth and privilege. "Still playing with your rope tricks, old man?" Garrett called out, his voice carrying the casual cruelty that had become his trademark. Perhaps you should focus on actual combat training instead of nursery games. His companions laughed dutifully, their mirth echoing across the training ground like the cawing of carrion birds. Aldric felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the automatic response to humiliation that never quite faded, despite years of practice. But something had changed in recent weeks. Where once he might have endured the mockery in silence, now he found himself drawing strength from an unexpected source. Bramble had moved closer during the night's approach, positioning himself between Aldric and his tormentors in a gesture of quiet solidarity. "Combat training takes many forms," Aldric replied calmly, his hand resting on Bramble's neck. "Not all of them involve showing off for an audience." The barb hit home, and Garrett's expression darkened. "Careful, Sir Aldric. Your tongue is sharper than your blade these days." "Both are sharp enough for my purposes," Aldric replied, meeting the younger man's gaze without flinching. For a moment, tension crackled between them like lightning before a storm. The younger knights sensed the shift in atmosphere, their laughter dying as they recognized the potential for real conflict. Garrett's hand drifted toward his sword hilt, a gesture both threatening and theatrical. Elena rose from her stool, her presence adding weight to the confrontation. Though she held no rank or title, her connection to the castle's daily operations gave her a quiet authority that even nobles respected. More importantly, her obvious support for Aldric sent a clear message about where loyalties lay. "Perhaps," she said with deceptive mildness, "the knights would benefit from observing different training methods. After all, diversity of approach often reveals hidden strengths." Her words diffused the immediate tension while subtly challenging the young men's assumptions. Garrett found himself caught between escalating a confrontation with a commoner and backing down before his followers, neither option appealing to his pride. "Another time," he said finally, his tone suggesting the matter was far from settled. "We have real training to accomplish." As the group rode away, their hoofbeats echoing off the castle walls, Aldric felt a curious mixture of relief and anticipation. The confrontation had been avoided, but something fundamental had shifted in the dynamics of castle life. It was no longer the invisible knight to be mocked without consequence. He had allies now, and perhaps more importantly, he had remembered his own worth. "You handled that well," Elena said quietly, watching the departing knights with thoughtful eyes. "We handled it well," Aldric corrected, his emphasis on the plural deliberate and meaningful. The training session continued with renewed focus, both man and horse working with the intensity of those who understood that preparation might soon mean survival. Bramble's responses grew sharper, more immediate, as if he too sensed the approaching test of their partnership. By mid-morning, their work had attracted other observers. Willem appeared at the training ground's edge, his experienced eye evaluating Bramble's progress with professional interest. Behind him came several of the castle's grooms and stable hands, drawn by curiosity about the transformation taking place before their eyes. "I've never seen a horse recover so completely," Willem admitted, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "When he first arrived, I thought we'd be putting him down within the week." The comment sparked murmurs of agreement from the gathered servants. They had all witnessed Bramble's initial condition, the broken spirit that seemed beyond healing. To see him now strong, alert, and responsive spoke to possibilities they had not dared imagine. "What changed?" asked Marcus, one of the younger grooms who had helped care for Bramble during his darkest days. Aldric paused in his work, considering the question seriously. The answer went beyond simple techniques or remedies, touching on something more fundamental about the nature of healing and hope. "We stopped seeing him as broken," he said finally. "Instead of focusing on what he couldn't do, we began working with what he could. Small steps, patient progress, and most importantly, we never gave up, believing he could be whole again." The words carried weight beyond their immediate context, and several of the listeners nodded with understanding that went deeper than horse training. In a world that often discarded the wounded and forgotten, Aldric's approach offered a different philosophy, one that valued persistence over perfection, growth over glory. As the morning advanced toward noon, the training session drew to its natural conclusion. Bramble had worked hard, his coat gleaming with honest sweat and his breathing deep but steady. More importantly, his eyes held the satisfied weariness of effort well expended rather than the dull exhaustion of despair. "Tomorrow we'll try him under saddle for longer periods," Aldric announced, coiling the training rope with practiced efficiency. "The northern mission departs in less than a week, and we need to be certain of his stamina." Elena nodded, already mentally preparing the additional supplies they would need. "I'll speak with the castle physician about strengthening tonics. Something to build his endurance without overtaxing his system." The practical planning felt good, a return to the purposeful activity that had defined Aldric's younger years. For too long, he had drifted through days without clear objectives, his skills atrophying from disuse. Now, with a definite goal and a partner who depended on him, he felt the return of focus that had once made him a formidable knight. The afternoon brought news that cast shadow over their progress. A messenger arrived from the northern marsh, his horse lathered and his face grim with exhaustion. The report he carried spoke of increased Nordmark activity, with entire warbands moving south in coordinated formations. "They're not raiding anymore," the messenger reported to King Edmund's hastily assembled council. "This is invasion, pure and simple. They mean to take and hold territory, not just steal what they can carry." The implications sent ripples of concern through the castle's population. Raids could be endured, their damage localized and temporary. But invasion meant the systematic destruction of everything the kingdom had built. The replacement of law and order with the harsh rule of conquest. That evening, as Aldric tended to Bramble's final care of the day, he found his thoughts turning to the challenges ahead. The northern mission had taken on new urgency, evolving from reconnaissance to a desperate attempt to gather intelligence that might prevent catastrophe. "Are you afraid?" Elena asked quietly, her question cutting through his brooding contemplation. Aldric considered his answer carefully, unwilling to offer false bravado or succumb to despair. "I'm concerned," he said finally. "Fear is useful if it keeps you alert and cautious. Terror is deadly because it paralyzes thought and action." Elena nodded, her expression showing she understood the distinction. "And Bramble? Is he ready?" Aldric looked at his partner, taking in the horse's calm strength and quiet dignity. Bramble had come so far from the broken animal he had been, but the ultimate test lay ahead. In battle, there would be no gentle encouragement or patient correction only. The harsh demands of survival. "He's ready to try," Aldric said finally. "That's all any of us can be, ready to give our best effort and see where it leads." The training rope lay coiled beside them, its simple form holding the weight of weeks of patient work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and the days beyond promised trials that would test everything they had built together. But for now, in the quiet sanctuary of the stables, man and horse stood ready to face whatever fate had in store. The cracked shield hung on the stable wall like a monument to failure, its split running from rim to boss in a jagged line that spoke of violence. Barely survived. Aldric had kept it all these years, though he could not say exactly why. Perhaps it served as reminder of mortality's thin margin, or maybe it simply represented the honest wear that came from actual service rather than ceremonial display. The crack had happened at Greystone Ford, when a Nordmark axe had bitten deep into the steel and nearly taken his arm with it. He could have had it repaired, the royal armorer skilled enough to make it whole again. But something in that visible wound appealed to him, the acknowledgement that even the strongest defenses could be broken, that survival sometimes meant learning to function despite damage. Now, As reports of Nordmark victories arrived with increasing frequency, the shield seemed prophetic. Each messenger brought news of another defeat, another fortress fallen, another company of brave men reduced to scattered survivors fleeing south. The kingdom's carefully planned defenses were cracking like poorly forged steel, and fear began to spread through the castle like plague. "Ironhold has fallen," Sir Marcus announced to the assembled knights, his voice carrying across the great hall with barely concealed excitement. At 25, the prince viewed the crisis as opportunity rather than catastrophe, his inexperience preventing him from understanding the true implications of each defeat. Murmurs of concern rippled through the gathered men, though the younger knights tried to mask their unease with bravado. Ironhold was supposed to be impregnable, its massive walls and veteran garrison the cornerstone of northern defense. If the Nordmark could take such a stronghold, what hope did lesser fortifications have? "How?" demanded Sir Garrett, his usual arrogance tempered by genuine worry. The fortress was thought to hold provisions for months of siege. "Treachery," Prince Marcus replied, the word hanging in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Someone opened the gates from within. The garrison was massacred before they could mount proper resistance. The implications sent a chill through even the most confident knights. Bad enough to face a skilled enemy in honest battle, but the specter of betrayal from within made every man question his neighbors. Trust, the foundation of military organization, began to erode like castle walls under siege engines. Aldric listened from his customary position among the lesser knights, his weathered face showing none of the shock that marked younger men. He had seen treachery before, had learned that desperate times brought out both the best and worst in human nature. The fall of Ironhold was a disaster, but not an unexpected one. Fortresses were only as strong as the men who held them, and men could be corrupted or coerced. "What of Lord Commander Theron?" asked Sir Edmund, one of the older knights whose experience matched Aldric's own. "Missing," Prince Marcus admitted. "Either dead in the fighting or taken prisoner. The few survivors who escaped speak of seeing him on the walls during the initial assault, but his fate after that remains unknown." The loss of Theron struck Aldric like a physical blow. The Lord Commander had been one of the few court officials who treated him with respect, remembering the younger knight who had served with distinction in border campaigns. More than that, Theron was arguably the kingdom's finest military mind, his tactical brilliance and steady leadership irreplaceable. As the meeting dispersed, Aldric found himself walking beside Sir Edmund toward the stables. The older knight's expression mirrored his own concern, the weight of experience allowing them to see past immediate shock to longer-term implications. "This changes everything," Edmund said quietly. "Without Theron's leadership and with Ironhold in enemy hands, the entire northern line has collapsed. The question now," Aldric replied, "is whether we're preparing for defense or evacuation." The words carried grim truth that neither man wanted to acknowledge. The kingdom's military strategy had assumed the northern fortresses would hold long, enough for reinforcements to arrive and counterattack. With those assumptions shattered, they faced the prospect of fighting a defensive war on their own soil. In the stables, Bramble waited with the patience of an animal who had learned to trust in his master's return. The horse's transformation continued daily, his physical recovery now complete, and his spirits restored to something approaching their former glory. But even Bramble seemed to sense the changed atmosphere in the castle, his alert ears and watchful eyes reflecting the tension that permeated every conversation. "Bad news?" Elena asked, reading their expressions with the insight of one who had learned to decode the subtle signals of court life. "The worst," Aldric replied, beginning his evening routine of checking Bramble's condition. The familiar tasks provided comfort in uncertain times, the simple rhythms of care offering refuge from the chaos of larger events. Elena listened without comment as he explained the day's revelations, her face growing pale as the implications became clear. Like everyone in the castle, she had family and friends scattered throughout the kingdom, people who would suffer if the Nordmark advance continued unchecked. "What happens now?" she asked when he finished. "We prepare," Aldric said simply. "We train, we plan, and we hope that someone in authority has ideas better than mine." But privately, he wondered if hope was enough. The kingdom's military leadership was young and untested, their strategies based more on romantic notions of warfare than practical experience. Against an enemy like the Nordmark, such inexperience could prove fatal. The following days brought a cascade of increasingly dire reports. Nordmark war bands had crossed the Great River, penetrating deeper into civilized territory than any enemy in living memory. They moved with disturbing coordination, their separate columns converging on strategic targets with timing that suggested either supernatural intelligence or the guidance of someone intimately familiar with the kingdom's defenses. "They know too much," Aldric confided to Elena during one of their evening sessions. "Their attacks are too precise, too well informed. Someone is feeding them information." The possibility of high-level treachery added another layer of uncertainty to an already desperate situation. If the enemy had agents within the kingdom's councils, traditional military responses might prove worse than useless. They could become traps that delivered defenders into enemy hands. Prince Marcus seemed oblivious to such concerns, his planning sessions with the younger knights characterized by bold talk and dramatic gestures. They spoke of glorious charges and heroic last stands, their conversations revealing more about their reading habits than their understanding of actual warfare. "We'll meet them on the field of honor," Garrett declared during one such gathering, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never seen a battlefield. "Let them come. We'll show these barbarians the quality of civilized knights." Aldric bit back his immediate response, knowing that contradiction would only invite mockery. But he could not shake the image of his cracked shield with its reminder that honor and civilization offered little protection against sharp steel wielded by skillful hands. His own preparations took a different form, focused on practical concerns rather than grand gestures. He studied maps of the northern territories, memorizing terrain features and identifying potential defensive positions. He checked and rechecked his equipment, ensuring that every piece was in perfect working order. Most importantly, he continued, working with Bramble, pushing their partnership to new levels of coordination and trust. "You're preparing for a different war than the rest of them," Elena observed one evening as she watched him methodically inspect his armor. "I'm preparing for the war we're likely to get," Aldric replied, "not the one we might prefer." The distinction was crucial. The young knights dreamed of glorious cavalry charges across open fields, banners flying and trumpets sounding the advance. Aldric expected night attacks, ambush tactics, and the brutal efficiency of an enemy who cared nothing for romantic notions of honorable combat. As the week progressed, his sense of foreboding deepened. The Nordmark advance had slowed, not from exhaustion or supply problems, but from deliberate planning. They were consolidating their gains, establishing secure bases of operation, and preparing for the next phase of their campaign. Such methodical approach suggested leadership of uncommon ability. Who is commanding them? He wondered aloud during a quiet moment with Bramble. The horse could not answer, but his attentive silence provided comfort nonetheless. The question haunted Aldric's thoughts as he fell asleep each night. The Nordmark were fierce warriors, but they had never shown such strategic sophistication. Someone was guiding them, someone who understood both their strengths and the kingdom's weaknesses. The identity of that leader might determine whether the realm survived or fell to foreign conquest. His cracked shield hung in silent testimony to the fragility of all defenses, its damaged surface reflecting candlelight like a broken mirror. Soon, Aldric feared, they would all discover just how thin the line between civilization and chaos really was. The Warhorn's bronze surface gleamed dully in the torchlight, its ancient metal bearing the patina of centuries, carved with runes. From the kingdom's founding days, it had called warriors to battle since before living memory, its voice carrying across battlefields to summon courage from the depths of desperate hearts. Now it hung silent in the castle's armory, waiting for the moment when its clarion call would be needed once more. Sir Aldric stood before it in the pre-dawn darkness, his weathered hands tracing the horn's elaborate carvings. Each symbol told a story of past conflicts, victories won and defeats endured, heroes fallen and legends born. The weight of history pressed down upon him like winter fog, heavy with the knowledge that his own story might soon join those etched in bronze. And memory. The past week had brought a succession of increasingly disturbing reports from the north. The Nordmark advance had resumed with renewed vigor, their war bands sweeping aside scattered resistance with methodical efficiency. Worse still, refugees streaming south carried tales of systematic destruction that went beyond mere conquest and tire. Settlements burned to ash, livestock slaughtered, and the very foundations of civilization torn apart. They mean to leave nothing behind. One survivor had told King Edmund's council, her voice hollow with shock. Not a single building standing, not a field left unburned. They want to erase us completely. Such thoroughness spoke to planning that went far beyond typical raiding. The Nordmark were implementing a strategy of total war, designed not just to defeat their enemies, but to obliterate all trace of their existence. It was the work of a mind that understood the psychological impact of absolute destruction. Bramble stirred in his stall as Aldric returned from the armory, the horse's keen senses detecting his master's troubled mood. The animal's recovery had progressed beyond all expectations, his injuries fully healed, his strength restored, and his spirit burning with quiet fire. Yet even Bramble seemed affected by the castle's atmosphere of impending doom, his usual calm alertness taking on an edge of anticipation. "Soon, old friend," Aldric murmured, running his hand along the horse's neck. "One way or another, we'll have our answer soon." The reconnaissance mission had been postponed twice as the situation deteriorated, its original purpose of gathering intelligence superseded by more immediate concerns. Now it seemed likely they would march not as scouts, but as part of a desperate, defensive effort. Their limited numbers, all that stood between the enemy and the kingdom's heartland. Elena appeared at the stable entrance, carrying a leather satchel that clinked softly with its contents. Inside were provisions for the journey, hardtack and dried meat, medicinal herbs, and other necessities carefully selected for their compact utility. Her preparations had been as thorough as any quartermaster's, driven by the understanding that small details often determine survival. "The castle feels different tonight," she observed, settling onto her familiar stool beside Bramble's stall. "Like a held breath before something terrible happens." Aldric nodded, recognizing the same tension she described. The servants moved. With nervous efficiency, the guards stood their watches with unusual alertness, and even the castle's dogs seemed restless. Animals and common folk often sensed approaching danger before their social superiors acknowledged it. "Fear spreads faster than plague," he replied, "and it's harder to cure." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy, boots on stone that announced official business. A royal messenger appeared at the stable entrance, his young face grave with the weight of his commission. "Sir Aldric, you're summoned to immediate council. All knights, no exceptions." The great hall buzzed with nervous energy when Aldric arrived, taking his place among the assembled knights with a sense of momentous occasion. King Edmund sat upon his throne with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the world, while Prince Marcus stood at his right hand in armor that had clearly been hastily donned. "My lords," the king began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. The hour of decision has arrived. Our enemies have crossed the Thornwood River and now march directly toward the capital. We have perhaps 5 days before they reach our outer defenses. The announcement struck the hall like a physical blow, drawing gasps of shock from even the most experienced knights. The Thornwood River was supposed to be their final fallback position, its broad waters and steep banks providing natural obstacles that should have delayed any advance by weeks. How is this possible? Sir Garrett demanded, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine alarm. The bridges were destroyed, the fords heavily defended. The defenses were betrayed, Prince Marcus answered, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Someone provided detailed maps of secret crossings, information known only to our highest military commanders. The word betrayal hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre, poisoning every breath with its implications. Bad enough to face superior numbers and foreign tactics, but the specter of treachery from within their own ranks transformed military crisis into existential nightmare. Therefore, King Edmund continued, I am mobilizing every available knight for immediate deployment. We march at dawn to make our stand at Falcon's Ridge, where the terrain favors defense and the enemy cannot bring their full numbers to bear. Falcon's Ridge Aldric knew the location well from his younger days patrolling the kingdom's borders. It was indeed a defensible position, its steep slopes and narrow approaches creating natural choke points that could multiply the effectiveness of smaller forces. But it was also a place from which retreat would be nearly impossible, a final gamble that would determine the kingdom's fate. What of the civilian population? Asked Sir Edmund, one of the few older knights whose voice still carried weight in council. Evacuation has already begun, the king replied grimly. Those who can travel are moving south toward the coastal fortresses. Those who cannot, we fight for them where they stand. The implications were clear. This would be no calculated retreat to prepared positions, but a desperate last stand with the kingdom's survival hanging in the balance. Win, and they might drive back the invasion. Lose, and everything they had sworn to protect would fall under foreign rule. As the formal council dispersed, smaller groups formed to discuss practical arrangements. The younger knights clustered around Prince Marcus, their voices animated with excitement despite the dire circumstances. They spoke of glorious death and eternal honor, their inexperience allowing them to romanticize what promised to be a brutal struggle for survival. The older knights gathered in quieter consultation. Their conversations focused on supply lines, defensive positions, and the grim mathematics of warfare. They understood what the younger men did not, that glory was a luxury afforded only to those who lived to claim it. What do you think? Sir Edmund asked quietly as he joined Aldric near the hall's great windows. I think we're about to discover what we're truly made of, Aldric replied, watching the dawnlight creep across the castle's ancient stones. All of us nobles and commoners, young and old, experienced and green. Edmund nodded gravely. And? Your horse? Is he ready for what's coming? Aldric considered the question seriously. Bramble had recovered from his physical wounds, but battle would test him in ways that stable training could never simulate. The noise, chaos, and sheer terror of combat would challenge every bond they had built together. He's as ready as patience. And care can make him, Aldric said finally. The rest will depend on courage, his and mine both. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of preparation and final arrangements. Weapons were sharpened, armor inspected, and provisions distributed with the methodical efficiency of men who understood their lives might depend on such details. The castle's atmosphere grew increasingly charged, like air before a thunderstorm. Elena worked beside him throughout the day, her presence a constant source of strength and comfort. She spoke little, but her steady support said more than any words could convey. When evening came, she helped him make final adjustments to Bramble's tack, or skilled hands ensuring that every strap and buckle was perfectly fitted. "Will you come back?" she asked quietly as they finished their work. The question hung between them like a bridge neither had dared cross before. Aldric looked into her eyes and saw not just concern for an aging knight, but something deeper and more precious love, freely given without expectation of return. "I don't know," he admitted, his honesty a gift he offered in place of false comfort, "but I know I'll try." She nodded, understanding that such honesty was worth more than empty promises. "Then I'll be here when you do." The war horn remained, silent on the armory wall, but its presence seemed to echo through the castle like a ghost of battles yet to come. Tomorrow would bring the test that separated legend from reality, heroes from pretenders. And somewhere in the approaching darkness, an enemy army prepared to discover what manner of men defended this ancient kingdom. The hidden letter crackled between Aldric's fingers like autumn leaves, its parchment bearing the weight of treason. Beyond imagination. Written in Prince Marcus's careful script, the document transformed everything he thought he knew about the kingdom's peril. The words seemed to burn themselves into his memory as he read by flickering candlelight in the abandoned watchtower where he had sought shelter from the night's cold rain. "The northern defenses will fall according to plan," the letter read. "Father's scouts report exactly as we anticipated. When Ironhold falls, ensure your forces push south along the river road. I will arrange for the bridge guards to be ... indisposed. The crown grows heavy on an old man's head, and the kingdom requires younger leadership to face the challenges ahead." Aldric's hands trembled, not from cold, but from the magnitude of what he held. Prince Marcus was not just failing to defend the kingdom. He was actively collaborating with its enemies, trading his father's throne for Nordmark's support. The systematic nature of the invasion, the uncanny accuracy of enemy intelligence, the convenient failures of key defenses, all of it made terrible sense now. He had discovered the letter by purest chance, seeking shelter during his evening patrol when a sudden storm made travel dangerous. The abandoned watchtower had seemed empty, but Marcus's voice from the chamber below had frozen him in place. What followed was a conversation that shattered every assumption about loyalty and honor. "The old ways are dying," Marcus had told his Nordmark contact, a scarred warrior whose accent marked him as high-ranking among the raiders. "My father clings to outdated notions of knightly honor, while the world changes around him. Better to embrace change than be crushed by it." "And your knights?" the Nordmark had asked. "Will they follow when the truth emerges?" "The young ones will adapt. They always do when survival demands it." The older knights ... double quotes Marcus's voice had carried cruel amusement. "Well, their romantic notions of loyalty will make them useful martyrs. Nothing inspires a population like the noble sacrifice of beloved leaders." Aldric had remained frozen in his hiding place, scarcely daring to breathe as the conversation revealed the depth of Marcus's betrayal. The prince had been feeding intelligence to the enemy for months, systematically weakening defenses and arranging for key positions to fall. Worse still, he planned to use the kingdom's defenders as unwitting pawns in his elaborate deception. "The final battle must appear legitimate," Marcus had continued. "My father and his loyal knights will die fighting bravely, and I will emerge as the sole survivor to negotiate terms with our new allies. The kingdom will be preserved, albeit under new management." The Nordmark warrior had chuckled appreciatively. "Your father raised a clever son. Very well, we will ensure he has the heroic death he deserves. And the knights? Those who cannot adapt will join him." Marcus had replied with chilling casualness. "The kingdom's future belongs to those wise enough to embrace it." Now, alone in the darkness with damning evidence clutched in his weathered hands, Aldric felt the weight of impossible choices. To expose Marcus would require proof that went beyond his word against a prince's, proof that might not be believed. Until too late. Yet to remain silent meant watching his king and fellow knights march unknowingly into a trap designed by their own prince. Bramble shifted restlessly in the chamber below, his keen senses detecting his master's agitation. The horse had waited patiently while Aldric grappled with revelations that transformed loyal son into treacherous enemy. But even animal patience had limits when danger pressed close. The letter represented more than just evidence. It was a tactical map of the kingdom's destruction, detailing exactly how Marcus intended to eliminate potential opposition while maintaining plausible deniability. The prince had thought of everything, from ensuring loyal knights would be positioned where enemy forces could eliminate them to arranging for his own miraculous survival to rally the survivors. Clever, Aldric murmured bitterly, understanding how completely they had all been manipulated. Every strategy session, every defensive plan, every desperate measure, all of it had been shared with the enemy through Marcus's treachery. They were not just outnumbered and outmaneuvered. They were betrayed at the highest level. A sound from outside froze his blood hoofbeats approaching through the rain. Multiple riders moving with the careful precision of scouts rather than the urgency of messengers. Aldric pressed himself against the stone wall, listening as voices carried through the storm. "Check the tower," someone commanded in accented English. "Prince says there might be watchers." Nordmark warriors, then part of the advance force that would soon trap the kingdom's army at Falcon's Ridge. Aldric felt his heart hammering against his ribs as footsteps approached the tower's base. If they found him here with Marcus's letter, both he and the evidence would disappear into the night. Bramble's intelligence proved their salvation. The horse began a restless movement in his stall, creating the sounds of a mount disturbed by weather rather than human presence. When the Nordmark scouts investigated, they found only a knight's horse seeking shelter from the storm, a perfectly ordinary sight that aroused no suspicion. "Just a stray," one reported. "No rider. Probably fled when the storm hit," another agreed. These soft kingdom knights fear getting wet. Their laughter faded as they moved on, but Aldric remained motionless for long minutes after their departure. The encounter had demonstrated how precarious his position was, a lone knight with dangerous knowledge, hunted by enemies who believed they had already won. The letter seemed to burn in his hands as he considered his options. Returning to the castle would likely mean death, as Marcus could easily arrange an accident for any knight who might threaten his plans. But remaining silent would doom King Edmund and every loyal knight in the kingdom to massacre at Falcon's Ridge. What would father do? He whispered to himself, seeking guidance from memory of the man who had taught him that honor was more precious than life. The answer came with crystalline clarity. Thomas Thornwick would have done his duty regardless of personal cost. A blacksmith's son who had earned knighthood through service would not abandon his king in the hour of greatest need, no matter the odds against him. But wisdom suggested that charging directly into Marcus's trap would accomplish nothing beyond adding his name to the casualty lists. If he was to serve his king effectively, he needed to be clever as well as brave, using the enemy's assumptions against them. The storm began to abate as dawn approached, revealing a world washed clean by rain but shadowed by knowledge too terrible to bear alone. Aldric carefully tucked the letter inside his armor, its presence a constant reminder of the knife poised at the kingdom's heart. Somehow, he had to find a way to warn King Edmund without alerting Marcus to his discovery. Bramble seemed to sense the change in their circumstances, his posture alert and ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The horse had recovered from his wounds to become something magnificent, powerful, intelligent, and utterly trustworthy. Now that loyalty would be tested as never before. "Just you and me against the world," Aldric murmured, stroking the horse's neck. "Think we can manage it?" Bramble's soft wicker seemed to express confidence in their partnership, a faith that helped steel Aldric's resolve. They had found each other in their darkest hour and rebuilt themselves through patient care and mutual trust. Now they would discover if such bonds were strong enough to save a kingdom. The hidden letter crackled against his chest as he mounted, its presence a reminder that some betrayals cut so deep they threatened the very foundations of the world. The betrayal worked both ways. Marcus had no idea his treachery had been discovered, and surprise was often the only advantage a desperate man possessed. As they rode through the morning mist toward an uncertain fate, Aldric found himself thinking of the ancient war horn hanging silent in the castle armory. Soon, very soon, its voice would be needed to call all loyal hearts to battle. The question was whether there would be anyone left to hear its call. The battle standard of Aldric's old company hung limp in the still morning air, its faded colors speaking of campaigns fought and comrades lost in service to a crown that had forgotten their sacrifice. He had retrieved it from the castle's depths the night before, seeking some connection to the idealistic young knight he had once been. Now the threadbare silk seemed to mock his desperate situation. One aging warrior with impossible knowledge, racing against time to prevent catastrophe. The tattered banner bore the image of a silver falcon on a field of green, the emblem of the Third Company that had distinguished itself in the border wars 20 years past. Most of his old brothers in arms were dead now, their names carved in castle stone, but their deeds forgotten by all save those who had shared their struggles. Yet their memory lent strength to his resolve. They had died believing in something greater than themselves, and their sacrifice deserved better than betrayal from within. King Edmund's army was already forming ranks in the courtyard below. The ordered chaos of military preparation, filling the air with shouts, clanging metal, and nervous whinnying of horses. From his vantage point in the tower window, Aldric could see the careful deployment that Prince Marcus had orchestrated, loyal knights positioned where enemy forces could easily surround them, while those of questionable loyalty were placed in safer reserve positions. The irony was almost perfect. Marcus had convinced his father that such deployment represented sound tactical thinking, protecting inexperienced fighters while placing veterans where their skills would prove most valuable. In reality, it was a death warrant signed by filial affection and delivered by treacherous design. Sir Aldric? Eleanor's voice carried up from the chamber below, tinged with worry that had deepened over the past 3 days. She had sensed his growing tension without understanding its source, her intuitive nature detecting changes he tried desperately to conceal. "Coming," he replied, carefully folding the standard and securing it beneath his armor. The banner would ride with him into battle, a reminder of oaths taken in honor preserved despite all temptation to abandon principle for survival. Elena waited beside Bramble's stall, her face pale but determined. She had spent the morning making final preparations, checking equipment, preparing medical supplies, and ensuring that everything was ready for departure. Her efficiency masked deep anxiety about outcomes she could not control. "You haven't been sleeping," she observed, studying his face with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read subtle signs. "And you've been different since your patrol 3 nights ago. What happened out there?" The question hung between them like a sword blade, sharp with implications neither could fully voice. Aldric felt the weight of Prince Marcus's letter against his chest, its presence a constant reminder of secrets too dangerous to share, yet too important to bear alone. "I learned something that changes everything," he said carefully, unwilling to lie but unable to reveal the full truth. "The battle we're riding toward isn't what it appears to be." Elena's eyes narrowed with understanding that went beyond his words. "You're planning something. Something dangerous beyond the normal dangers of war." "I'm planning to do my duty," Aldric replied, the phrase carrying weight that transformed simple words into solemn vow, whatever the cost. She stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm with gentle pressure that conveyed more than any declaration. "Then I'll pray to whatever gods still listen that your duty doesn't require your death. And if it does, Then I'll pray they make it count for something. The simple faith in her words struck him more powerfully than any grand speech about honor and sacrifice. Elena understood the harsh mathematics of war better than the young knights who spoke glibly of glorious death. She knew that survival was preferable to martyrdom, but that some things were worth dying for nonetheless. Bramble stirred restlessly in his stall, sensing the charged atmosphere that preceded battle. The horse had grown magnificent over the past months, his recovery transforming him from broken charity case to something approaching his former glory. His coat gleamed with health, his bearing spoke of restored confidence, and his eyes held the alert intelligence of a warrior ready for action. "He knows what's coming," Elena observed, watching the horse's careful preparation. "Look at the way he holds himself, not afraid, but ready." Aldric nodded, recognizing the same quality in his mount that he had tried to cultivate in himself. Battle was approaching with the inevitability of sunrise, but they would meet it with dignity intact and purpose clear. Whatever Prince Marcus had planned, he would discover that some knights could not be so easily disposed of. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their quiet communion. Sir Edmund appeared at the stable entrance, his weathered face grim with the knowledge of what lay ahead. At 62, he was the oldest knight still serving actively, his experience spanning decades of border conflicts and internal strife. "Time to move," he announced simply. "The king wants all companies formed and ready within the hour." "Any word from the northern scouts?" Aldric asked, though he already knew what the answer would be. "Nothing good," Edmund replied grimly. "The enemy is moving faster than expected, and their numbers appear larger than our initial estimates. It seems we'll have our work cut out for us at Falcon's Ridge." The understatement would have been amusing under different circumstances. Falcon's Ridge was indeed defensible terrain, but only if the defenders understood they were walking into an ambush. As matters stood, King Edmund's army would arrive expecting to choose their ground and prepare their defenses, only to discover that the enemy was already in position and waiting. "Edmund," Aldric said quietly, his voice carrying an urgency that made the older knight pause. "When we reach the ridge, stay close to the king. Don't trust the initial deployment orders, no matter who gives them." Edmund's eyes sharpened with understanding that went beyond the words spoken. "You know something." "I know enough," Aldric replied. "Just stay alert and keep the other veterans close." The older knight nodded slowly, recognizing the gravity beneath Aldric's careful phrasing. Years of friendship and shared service had created bonds of trust that needed no elaborate explanation. If Aldric sensed danger beyond the obvious threats, Edmund would heed the warning without requiring detailed justification. As Edmund departed to complete his own preparations, Elena helped Aldric make final adjustments to Bramble's tack. Every strap was checked, every buckle tested, every piece of equipment verified as ready for the demands ahead. Their movements carried the ritual quality of prayers offered to uncertain gods. "There's something else," Elena said as they worked. "Something I need to tell you before you leave." Aldric paused in checking his saddle's fit, giving her his complete attention. Her tone suggested words that had been carefully considered, perhaps rehearsed in the privacy of sleepless nights. "I know what you think of yourself," she continued, her voice steady despite the emotion beneath. "A forgotten knight on a broken horse, passed over for advancement and ignored by those in power. But that's not what I see when I look at you." "What do you see?" "I see a man who refused to give up when everyone else had written him off. I see someone who found strength in adversity and wisdom in disappointment. I see the kind of knight the stories are supposed to be about, not the ones who seek glory, but the ones who do what's right regardless of recognition." Her words struck him like physical blows, each phrase carrying weight that threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained composure. In a world that had taught him to measure worth by others' opinions, Elena offered a different perspective, one that valued character over achievement, integrity over acclaim. "You matter," she finished, simply, "not because of what you've accomplished, but because of who you are. Remember that when the darkness closes in." The trumpets sounded before he could formulate an adequate response, their brazen voices echoing off the castle walls with summons that could not be ignored. The time for words had passed. Now only actions would speak the truths that mattered. Aldric swung into Bramble's saddle with practiced ease, feeling the horse's powerful muscles gather beneath him. The familiar weight of arms and armor, the leather's creak, the metal's cold touch, all of it, combined into the comfortable rhythm of preparation completed and duty accepted. The battle standard pressed against his chest as they rode toward the courtyard, its presence a reminder of oaths taken by younger men in more innocent times. Those men were gone now, swept away by decades of disappointment and compromise. But perhaps, in the crucible of approaching battle, something of their idealism might be recovered. Elena watched from the stable entrance as the column formed, her face composed but her eyes reflecting the weight of uncertainties that would not be resolved until battle's outcome was decided. She raised her hand in farewell, not the dramatic gesture of romance, but the simple acknowledgement of one human being to another facing an unknown fate. As they rode through the castle gates, Aldric felt the weight of impossible knowledge settle upon his shoulders like a mantle of lead. Somewhere ahead, Prince Marcus's trap waited with jaws opened wide, ready to devour a king's loyal knights in service to foreign masters. But the trap's success depended on surprise, and surprise was a weapon that could cut both ways. The morning sun climbed higher as they rode north, painting the world in shades of gold and shadow that seemed appropriate for a day when everything would be decided. Behind them lay the kingdom they had sworn to protect. Ahead waited enemies who thought victory was already assured. But enemies could be wrong, and even the most carefully laid plans could be disrupted by factors their architects had failed to consider. Prince Marcus had accounted for many variables in his elaborate betrayal, but he had overlooked one crucial element, the possibility that his treachery might be discovered by someone with both the courage to act and nothing left to lose. The battle standard rustled against Aldric's chest as Bramble's hooves ate up the miles, carrying them toward a confrontation that would determine not just the kingdom's fate, but the true meaning of the oaths they had sworn so many years ago. The royal banner snapped in the morning wind above Falcon's Ridge, its golden lion rampant against azure silk, a defiant challenge to the storm clouds gathering on the northern horizon. King Edmund sat his destrier beneath that proud standard, his gray beard catching the light as he surveyed the defensive positions his commanders had arranged. To his practiced eye, everything appeared perfectly ordered, cavalry positioned for maximum impact, infantry deployed to hold key terrain, reserves placed to exploit any breakthrough. He could not see the trap closing around him like the jaws of some monstrous beast. Aldric rode in the column's rear ranks, his weathered face a mask of controlled tension as he watched Prince Marcus direct the final deployments. The prince moved with confident authority, his commands placing loyal knights exactly where advancing enemies could surround and destroy them. Every order was tactically sound and strategically suicidal, the work of a mind that understood warfare well enough to pervert it. "The king positions himself well," Sir Garrett observed, his usual arrogance tempered by the magnitude of approaching battle. "When the enemy comes up that slope, they'll face the finest knights in the kingdom." "Indeed they will," Aldric replied, quietly, his words carrying weight that Garrett could not comprehend. Bramble shifted beneath him, the horse's keen senses detecting tension in the air that went beyond normal pre-battle nerves. The morning was too quiet, the enemy advanced too perfectly timed, the whole situation carrying an artificial quality that spoke of careful orchestration rather than natural military evolution. From their position on the ridge's southern slope, the kingdom's army commanded magnificent views of the surrounding countryside. Rolling hills stretched away in all directions, their autumn colors brilliant under the morning sun. Any enemy approach would be visible for miles, giving defenders ample time to prepare for contact. That visibility worked both ways, of course. Nordmark's scouts hidden in the forest below had been watching the deployment for hours, noting every position and reporting back to commanders who already knew exactly what they would find. Prince Marcus had provided detailed maps weeks ago, ensuring that surprise would be complete when the moment came. Sir Aldric. The voice belonged to Sir Edmund, who had maneuvered his mount close without attracting attention. The older knight's expression suggested urgent business conducted in whispers. "Edmund, I've been thinking about your warning," Edmund said quietly, his eyes scanning the deployment with new suspicion. "Something feels wrong about all this. The spacing is too wide, the reserves too far back, and the king." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The king is positioned exactly where an enemy archer could reach him." Aldric nodded grimly. "You see it too?" "I see a slaughter in the making," Edmund replied. "The question is whether it's accidental or deliberate." The question hung between them like smoke from a funeral pyre, its implications too terrible to voice openly. Both men had served the crown for decades, their loyalty tested and proven in countless campaigns. To suspect treason at the highest levels challenged everything they had believed about honor and duty. A horn sounded from the northern forest, not the bronze voice of their own war horn, but the harsh wooden call of Nordmark raiders. The sound echoed across the valley like a death knell, announcing that the moment of truth had finally arrived. "There?" Prince Marcus called out, pointing toward movement among the distant trees. "They come as expected." All companies prepare for action. The first Nordmark warriors emerged from the forest in loose formation, their advance casual and unhurried. They moved like men who knew exactly what they would find, their confidence speaking of intelligence that went far beyond normal scouting. Reports. Behind them, more figures appeared, hundreds of painted warriors flowing from concealment like water from a broken dam. "By the gods," Garrett breathed, his face paling as the enemy numbers became apparent. "There are thousands of them." "More than we were told," Edmund added grimly. "Far more." King Edmund raised his sword, sunlight catching the blade's polished surface and throwing reflections across the assembled knights. His voice carried clearly across the ridge as he delivered the words that had preceded every great battle in the kingdom's history. "For the realm, for our people, for the honor of our ancestors." The response thundered back from 1,000 throats. "For the realm." But even as the ritual words were spoken, Aldric felt the weight of approaching disaster. The enemy advance was too coordinated, too perfectly timed. These were not raiders seeking easy plunder, but professional soldiers executing a carefully planned operation. Prince Marcus had delivered them exactly what he had promised, a kingdom's finest knights positioned for maximum slaughter. The first arrows began to fall like deadly rain, their black shafts arcing high before plunging down among the cavalry formations. Horses screamed and reared as iron points found their mark, turning ordered ranks into chaos within moments. The attack came from 3 directions simultaneously, suggesting level of coordination that should have been impossible for barbarian raiders. "It's begun," Edmund said grimly, drawing his sword with the fluid motion of long practice. But Aldric barely heard him. His attention was fixed on Prince Marcus, watching for the moment when the prince would reveal his true allegiance. The betrayal would have to appear natural, a tactical decision made under pressure rather than treachery planned in advance. That moment came sooner than expected. As Nordmark war bands poured up the ridge's eastern slope, Prince Marcus rode toward his father with urgent gestures that spoke of tactical necessity. "Father, we must reposition the reserves to meet their flanking movement." King Edmund nodded, trusting his son's military judgment even as enemy forces closed on all sides. Do it. Save what you can." The orders that followed were masterful in their efficiency. Loyal knights were sent charging toward positions where enemy forces waited in ambush, while those of questionable loyalty were directed toward safety. Within minutes, the trap Marcus had so carefully constructed began to close with mechanical precision. Aldric watched Sir Garrick lead his company down the ridge's northern face, riding directly toward concealed Nordmark positions with the confidence of men who believed they were engaging scattered raiders. The young knight's banner streamed behind him, its bright colors soon to be trampled in foreign mud. "Now we know," Edmund said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of terrible understanding. "Now we act," Aldric replied, his hand closing on the battle standard hidden beneath his armor. Bramble's brave heart thundered beneath Aldric like war drums calling the faithful to battle. Each powerful beat a declaration that some bonds transcended fear and death itself. The horse had sensed the moment's approach before his rider fully understood it, that crystalline instant when all pretense fell away and truth stood naked beneath the autumn sky. "For the true king," Aldric's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk, his battle cry carrying across the ridge with stunning clarity. He spurred Bramble toward King Edmund's position, the old company standard streaming behind them like a silver falcon diving from heaven's heights. The sight of that forgotten banner stopped hearts and turned heads throughout the embattled army. Veterans who had served in the border wars recognized the symbol instantly, their memories flooding back to campaigns when honor meant something more than courtly advancement. The Third Company, the Falcon Company, riding once more into legend. Prince Marcus's carefully orchestrated betrayal wavered like smoke in a hurricane. His perfectly timed orders suddenly rang hollow as an aging knight on a broken horse challenged the very foundations of his treachery. The prince's face twisted with fury as he realized his elaborate deception was unraveling before his eyes. "Stop him!" Marcus screamed to his Nordmark allies concealed among the loyal knights. "Kill the old fool!" But Aldric and Bramble moved with the fluid grace of perfect partnership, every stride coordinated through weeks of patient training and trust rebuilt from ashes. Enemy arrows whispered past them like deadly promises, but the horse's intelligence and the knight's experience combined to find safe passage through the storm of steel. "Edmund, to me," Aldric called to his old friend, who was fighting desperately against overwhelming odds. "The banner calls the faithful." Sir Edmund's sword flashed as he cut down a Nordmark warrior who had appeared from nowhere, treachery disguised in royal colors. "The standard!" he gasped, recognizing the silver falcon through the smoke and confusion. "By all the gods, the Falcon Company rides again." Other veteran knights heard the call and began fighting their way toward the rallying point, their weathered faces lighting with something they had not felt in years, the fierce joy of serving a cause worthy of their lives. These were men who had been forgotten by glory, but remembered by duty, and they answered Aldric's summons with the terrible efficiency of experience. King Edmund sat his destrier in the center of it all, his gray beard matted with blood and his sword arm weary from constant action. Around him, the trap his son had prepared closed with mechanical precision. But now something unexpected was happening. His most loyal knights were rallying to a forgotten standard carried by a broken knight on a wounded horse. "Aldric!" the king called out, his voice carrying both gratitude and desperate hope. "Thank the gods. I thought that your son had arranged your death," Aldric finished grimly, reaching the king's side as Bramble scattered enemy warriors with hooves that struck like hammers. "He has, my lord, but some traps work both ways." The revelation hit King Edmund like a physical blow, his face draining of color as the implications became clear. His own son, his heir, his beloved Marcus, was the architect of this disaster, the traitor who'd sold the kingdom to foreign masters. "It can't be," the king whispered, but even as he spoke, he could see the truth written in the battle's choreographed precision. The enemy knew too much, moved too confidently, struck too accurately at the kingdom's most vital points. "I have proof," Aldric said, his voice carrying absolute certainty, "but explanations must wait. Right now, we fight for survival." Around them, the tide of battle had reached its crucial turning point. Prince Marcus's careful plans depended on eliminating key leaders while maintaining plausible deniability, but Aldric's intervention had disrupted that delicate balance. The loyal knights were no longer scattered and confused. They had a rallying point, a symbol, and most importantly, they knew the truth about their enemies. "Form square," Aldric commanded, his voice carrying the authority of decades spent in actual combat rather than ceremonial parades. "Protect the king. Let them come to us." The formation that took shape around King Edmund bore little resemblance to the parade ground exercises the younger knights had practiced. This was the grim efficiency of veterans who understood that survival trumped appearance, that living trumped dying gloriously. Bramble took his position at the formation's tip, his scarred hide and alert bearing a testament to the power of quiet courage. Prince Marcus watched his elaborate betrayal collapse with the helpless fury of a man who had planned everything except the possibility that his victims might refuse to cooperate with their own destruction. He spurred his horse toward the defensive square, his face twisted with rage that no longer bothered to conceal itself. "Father," he called out, his voice carrying well-practiced concern, "we must retreat. The position is untenable." "The only thing untenable here," King Edmund replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment, "is a son who would sell his father's kingdom to foreign masters." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that spread throughout both armies. Nordmark warriors who had expected easy victory suddenly found themselves facing enemies who knew the truth about their leadership. Kingdom knights who had been dying in confusion now understood why their efforts had seemed so futile. Prince Marcus's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the calculating mind that had orchestrated months of careful betrayal. "The old ways are dead, Father. I offered you a chance to adapt, to preserve something of what we built. You chose stubborn pride instead." "I chose honor," King Edmund replied simply. "Something you never understood." The prince's sword cleared its sheath in one fluid motion, its polished blade catching the afternoon light as he prepared to finish, personally, what his foreign allies had failed to accomplish. But as he spurred his horse toward his father, he found his path blocked by an aging knight on a scarred stallion. "You'll have to go through me first," Aldric said quietly, his own blade reflecting sunlight like captured starfire. Prince Marcus laughed, the sound carrying all the arrogance of youth confronting age. "The broken knight on his broken horse. How fitting that you should be the one to die first." But as the prince charged forward, confidence blazing in his eyes, he discovered what the court had never bothered to learn, that Aldric of Thornwick had earned his spurs through deed rather than birth, that his skills had been honed in actual combat rather than ceremonial display. The clash of steel rang across the battlefield like a bell tolling the end of deception, and in that moment, the true battle for the kingdom's soul finally began. The new knight's spurs gleamed with simple honesty in the great hall's candlelight, their unadorned steel speaking more eloquently than any jeweled ornament ever could. King Edmund held them in hands that still bore the scars of battle, their weight insignificant compared to the meaning they carried. These were not the gaudy rewards given to courtiers for political favor, but the honest recognition of service, freely given and courage demonstrated when it mattered most. "Kneel, Sir Aldric of Thornwick," the king commanded, his voice carrying to every corner of the rebuilt hall where once Prince Marcus had plotted treason. The ceremony was small by royal standards, no elaborate pageantry, no crowd of glittering nobles seeking reflected glory. Instead, the witnesses were those who had earned their places through blood and loyalty. Sir Edmund with his arms still bound from battle wounds. Elaine is standing proudly among the castle's essential staff, and Willem representing those who served. Without seeking recognition, Aldric knelt as commanded, feeling the weight of years settling upon his shoulders like a comfortable cloak. His hair was whiter now, his face more deeply lined, but his eyes held the quiet satisfaction of a man who had discovered his true worth in the crucible of ultimate testing. "You have served this realm with distinction for 30 years, King," Edmund continued, the formal words carrying personal warmth earned through shared ordeal. "You have proven that true nobility comes not from birth, but from the choices we make when everything hangs in the balance." The sword touched each shoulder with ceremonial precision, but Aldric barely felt it. His thoughts were with Bramble, waiting patiently in the royal stables, where he now held a place of honor among the kingdom's finest destriers. The horse had saved them all in the end, not through dramatic heroics, but through the steady courage that comes from knowing one's true worth. "Rise, Sir Aldric, Knight Commander of the Royal Guard and Keeper of the King's Trust." The title was more than honorary recognition. It represented real authority over the kingdom's defenses, acknowledgement that military leadership should rest with those who understood warfare's true nature rather than its romantic appearance. The position had been vacant since Lord Commander Theron's death at Ironhold, and no one questioned the wisdom of filling it with a man who had proven himself when all seemed lost thought as Aldric rose to his feet. Accepting the symbolic spurs that marked his elevation, he caught Elena's eye across the hall. Her smile carried all the warmth and pride that formal ceremony could not express. A private acknowledgement between two souls who had found each other in the darkness of despair. The battle at Falcon's Ridge had ended with victory snatched from the jaws of carefully planned defeat, but the cost had been grievous. Sir Garrett lay buried beneath the ridge's autumn soil, his youthful arrogance silenced forever by Nordmark's steel. Many other young knights shared his fate, their dreams of glory transformed into stark reality through Prince Marcus's betrayal. Marcus himself had died at Aldric's hand, his treachery ending with the same sword stroke that had begun his father's salvation. The prince had fought with skill and fury, but skill learned in tournament halls proved insufficient against experience earned in actual war. His final words had been a curse upon the old ways he had tried so desperately to destroy. "The northern border is secure," King Edmund announced as the ceremony concluded and the small gathering began to disperse. "Our enemies have learned that this kingdom cannot be easily conquered, regardless of the treachery they employ." The Nordmark retreat had been as swift as their advance, the foreign army melting back into the northern wastes once their careful plans collapsed. Without Prince Marcus's intelligence and promised support, they had found themselves facing opponents who knew their true nature and intentions. Such enemies were far more dangerous than expected victims. That evening, as castle life settled into routines that would slowly heal the wounds of betrayal and war, Aldric made his way to the stables for his customary visit with Bramble. The horse greeted him with gentle wicker that spoke of contentment beyond mere physical comfort. This was the satisfaction of partnership vindicated, of trust rewarded with triumph. "Well, old friend," Aldric said softly, running his weathered hand along the horse's neck, "we did it. Against all odds and expectations, we actually did it." Bramble's response was to rest his great head against Aldric's shoulder, a gesture of affection that said more than words ever could. They had found each other in their darkest hour, two forgotten souls dismissed by a world that valued appearance over substance. Through patience and mutual care, they had rebuilt themselves into something greater than either could have achieved alone. Elena appeared at the stall entrance, carrying a bucket of oats, and wearing the quiet smile that had become as essential to Aldric's happiness as breath itself. The months since the battle had brought changes to both their lives, his elevation to positions of real authority, a recognition as someone whose insights into character and motivation had proven invaluable to the kingdom's recovery. "The king has approved our request," she said without preamble, her words carrying the weight of plans long discussed and finally accepted. "All of it?" Aldric asked, though her expression had already provided the answer. "All of it. The new training program, the Veterans Council, the memorial for the fallen, everything we proposed has been accepted and funded." The plans they had developed together represented more than simple military reform. The new training program would ensure that future knights learned actual warfare rather than ceremonial pageantry, while the Veterans Council would give experienced voices influence over strategic planning. Most importantly, the memorial would honor those who had died not for glory, but for duty, common soldiers and forgotten knights whose names would be carved in stone alongside the nobility they had served. "And the other matter?" Aldric asked. Quietly, Elena's smile deepened, carrying warmth that had nothing to do with official recognition or royal approval. "The king has given his blessing to our union, should we choose to pursue it. He said the kingdom needs more partnerships built on mutual respect and proven loyalty." The words hung between them like golden threads, weaving together possibilities that had seemed impossible only months before. An aging knight and a stable master's daughter, such a match would have been scandalous by the old court standards. But the new order valued substance over appearance. "And do we choose to pursue it?" Aldric asked, his voice carrying gentle humor that masked deeper emotion. "I believe we do," Elena replied, stepping closer until they stood together in the circle of Bramble's protective presence. "After all, we've proven rather good at taking broken things and making them whole again." Outside the stable, the kingdom settled into evening peace, its borders secure and its future bright with possibilities that had seemed impossible when treachery threatened everything they held dear. The war horn hung silent in the armory. Its bronze voice no longer needed to call men to desperate battle. In the great hall, King Edmund sat before his fire and pondered the lessons learned through betrayal and redemption. His son's treachery had nearly destroyed everything, but from that darkness had emerged a truth more precious than any crown, that real strength came not from blood or breeding, but from the choices people made when tested by adversity. The castle's life continued around them, but for Aldric and Elena, this moment held the weight of all their tomorrows. They had found each other in darkness, built trust through patient care, and proven that love could flourish even in the soil of disappointment and loss. Bramble whickered softly, as if offering his blessing to the partnership that had saved them all. The horse understood, as animals often do, that some bonds transcend the ordinary boundaries of rank and station. He had been part of their healing, and they had been part of a circle of care that had transformed broken things into something beautiful. As night settled over the kingdom they had helped to save, Aldric felt the deep satisfaction that comes from duty fulfilled and purpose discovered. The broken knight and his wounded horse had become the heroes of their own story, proving that resilience and heart could indeed outlast polished armor and empty pride. The new knight's spurs caught the lamplight one final time as he closed the stable door, their simple beauty a reminder that true worth often comes in humble packages, revealed only to those wise enough to look beyond the surface and see the strength that lies beneath.